Not on the flats. So when bonefish, we think of them as a flat species.
Right.
Right. And that's mostly where they spend their time. And the adults have mostly a pretty small home range. But when they go to spawn, which is spawning might be on from late October till March or April, they'll migrate. We've tracked them migrating 70 miles, 80 miles. And they go to places that aren't the flats. They're kind of deeper water.
So you're tracking migrations?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they get into what we call pre-spawning aggregations.
How are you tracking them?
It's a secret.
This is the Connected by Water podcast, fueled by Papa's Pilar Rum, who remind us never to be a spectator. And protected by Starbright, where it's always Starbright season. Special thanks to our sponsors, Seaward Systems, Holokai, Parchview, and Lingchini for their great support of our show. This episode was recorded in our Seaward Systems studio, located on the eastern edge of the Florida Everglades.
We used to, we were talking before, we used to say we grew up surfing down here, and we'd have to travel up to where you're at, or at least that general area.
Mm-hmm.
We basically just, word on the street. This is when surf line was like a new thing when we were a kid, or even just like getting surf reports. And it was all like underground information, and now it's all on the internet and easily accessible and all that. So we used to just kind of sometimes ride and get off the highway to see where we go to Juneau. It wasn't breaking the right way. That would keep bouncing up, or sometimes we'd just be like, we're going all the way up to Sebastian Inlet, or if we got really ambitious, we'd go up to Cocoa and over in the area and stuff like that. So I always remember like North Jetty and Fort Pierce is always like a big longboard spot.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's crowded.
Yeah. Nowadays, I don't surf a lot anymore. Certainly not like I used to, but I got this 7.6 Almeric Wave Hog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's what I use now. So taking it slow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long have you been surfing?
Since college. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The what got you into that? You're from Maryland, right?
Yeah, but I live 3.5 hours from the coast.
Okay.
So I did, trips down there, sometimes boogie boarding.
Okay.
And then when I started college in North Carolina, there's some guys there who surf, so they would drive down to Wilmington.
Okay.
And so I went on a few of those.
Right.
Ride along. Then after college, I moved to California. First.
Oh, you lived in California too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You lived all over though, haven't you?
So you grew up in Maryland, started college in North Carolina, finished in Maryland, Southern California, Central California, Virginia for a master's degree.
Yeah.
Then the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Okay.
Then
what brought you down there?
Working for the local Fish and Wildlife Agency.
Okay.
And there's some surf there as well. Then Boston for graduate school, second to get my PhD.
Yeah, catching a lot of stripers up there.
Ton of stripers.
Yeah.
Up there. Yeah.
I'm supposed to go up there in September.
Yeah, I was up there in the late 90s.
Okay.
And that was right when the fishery was starting to come back. And before the Cape Cod flat fishery got real big. So in the four years I was there, the first year you'd go out waiting on the flats and you'd see maybe 6 people all day. By the time I left, it was crowded.
Okay.
Because it was back in the day we had fishing magazines, like printed things.
Yep.
One of the magazines had a story about flats fishing for stripers. There's at least one magazine had something in every issue.
Okay.
Yeah, that got the popularity up. And then from there, moved to Florida in 2001. Charlotte Harbor till 2012, 2011, 2012, and then Melbourne Beach ever since.
Okay. And how long have you been with Bonefish Tarpon Trust?
Started with Bonefish Tarpon Trust I did some research for them in 2003.
Okay.
Then I became a part-time director in 2006, and then full-time director in 2009. And then in 2015 or 2016, we brought in a president, CEO, and so then I stepped back to just director of science and conservation.
Okay, yeah, it's funny. I was talking a little bit about all that with our mutual friend Jeff Harkavy, which, thanks to Jeff, got us together. That's kind of cool of him to do. But he was explaining to me how you used to wear a lot of hats there.
Yeah. When I started, our budget was, I think, $350,000.
Okay.
And there were 2.5 of us. Yeah.
Wow.
Now our budget's $6 million plus, and I think there's 14 of us now.
Nice.
So, yeah, I mean, relatively speaking to the big NGOs, we're still pretty small. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, we pack a pretty big punch for our size.
Yeah, I mean, BTT's always been a very interesting organization to me. I felt that it was a small organization that came on hot and heavy in recent years, and for good reason. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring you in here today, is to kind of talk about the organization as a whole, and all the great things that you guys do. But before we get rolling, which we're going to get rolling here shortly, before I introduce you and everything, I want to introduce our do-gooder of this episode, the Starbright Project Sea Safe do-gooder. And this is actually a really good one for me, a personal one for me, because this girl, I used to tournament fish with this girl years ago, and she was a teeny kid, and now she's a big teenager. And we recently did a mangrove planting, and she was there. And so I want to highlight Pilar Lacaria and her father, Peyton, both good friends of the Connected by Water family. They took part in a planting of over 50 mangroves in George English Park, locally here in the South Florida area, alongside yours truly and CCA Florida Broward chapter and chapter president Mike Lambrix, as part of the ongoing initiative with the city of Fort Lauderdale that they have. So Pilar not only helped during this amazing event, but whenever out on the water with her family, she's always known for being an outstanding and responsible steward of our natural resources and just being an all-around good kid. So congrats, Pilar Lacaria, on being this episode's Starbright Project Sea Safe do-gooder. And she is going to get the Starbright bucket of fun over there. And remember, folks, you too can nominate a do-gooder. Just message us on social media. Me, Corey, Derek, Starbright, doesn't matter who, as long as we kind of know who needs to be recognized, and you can nominate them too. So without further ado, with me today, Dr. Aaron Adams from Bonefish Tarpon Trust. And you're also senior scientist at the
Harbor Branch
FAU, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And science is your life, right?
Well, science and fishing and surfing and water things.
Right. Jeff Harkavy calls you the Renaissance man. That's what he likes to say. He's make sure you call him the Renaissance man. I'm like, I'll make sure I do, Jeff. But I guess that's what he likes to call you, because you do a lot of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, not just for me, but for many others, it's a way of life, right? It's not just a side gig. It's life,
right?
Yeah, ocean, estuaries, salt water, salty water. Yeah, I'll dip into fresh water sometimes.
Yeah,
which is fun. But if I'm away from the ocean for more than a week, I start jonesing pretty
start
hard.
itching.
Yeah,
neck
start to shake. People ask me if I've quit coffee or something.
Yeah, get the jitters.
Yeah.
When did you know that science was your gig?
Well, I don't think there's really any moment. It's just, it was organic. So I started fishing when I was probably 4 years old. My parents used to take my sister and I to camping all the time.
Okay.
On tributaries to Chesapeake Bay, where I grew up in Maryland. And so that got me into fishing big time. I caught that bug. And my dad and my uncle were my mentors. So I learned a lot from them. But then also just going out by myself anytime I could. Once I got a driver's license and had access to a car, I skipped some days of school, high school. I had to go fishing. But during all that time, I started to ask myself the why questions. Why are the fish here now and not the same time tomorrow? Tides, of course. Why was that fishing hole good today, but it's dry today? Yeah, so pretty early on, I started to ask those kind of questions, and then so just naturally fell into the science side of it. So by middle school, I was kind of focused on the science classes.
Yeah.
All the way through high school, and then, ever since. So it's kind of the fishing and the science have long ago got completely integrated.
And you're a captain too, right? I mean,
I have a Coast Guard
license?
6-pack license. Yeah,
That's great.
So I'm not quite sure how, but at one point when I lived over in Charlotte Harbor on Pun Island, I did a little bit of guiding mostly during tarpon season.
Okay.
Not much. It's a few times a month. I just didn't have other time. I'm not quite sure how I had that time. Because
we find the time, right?
Yeah, we do. Well, one thing about tarpon season is it's a season of sleep deprivation, right? Because you get up before dawn. I could go out, do fishing on my own or do a short trip. Could be back in the office by 9, work till 4, 5, and then in the summer, go out fishing until...
You hit that late bite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
9, almost 10 o'clock. Yeah. And then get up and do it again for weeks on end.
Now, did you do a lot of fishing when you were in California?
Some, but not a ton.
Okay.
I did some offshore fishing, surf in the summer, especially in Southern California. I lived on Catalina Island for a year. In the summer, we'd go trolling for various types of mackerel, mako sharks, sea bass, that type of thing. But I did a lot of scuba diving out there.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. The scuba diving
like
really
kelp forest kind of stuff?
Yeah.
How's that? I always felt that was like a freaky thing. Just because, like, you don't know what's, like, I don't know, man. It's like darker water. You don't know what's hiding around, like, the corner.
Well, the nice thing about the kelp is, the stalks of the kelp go from the bottom all the way to the top.
Right.
And so there's not a lot of space for things to come through it.
Okay.
So you're not going to get typically big sharks will swim through the kelp forest because it's just... You remember the scene from Star Wars where they're on those air bikes and they're driving through the forest super fast?
Yep.
That.
Okay.
So it's the kelp is typically way too dense for anything to be in there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the kelp, no, there's no issues.
Got it.
But the lobster diving there was out there, and Catalina was fabulous. It was really good. Did some spear fishing back then, those types of things. I stopped spear fishing probably late 90s when I lived in the Caribbean and doing some time in Florida. Compared to previous years, there just wasn't enough left to make me feel okay about spearfishing still. I mean, there's some spots, but I guess that's part of that getting old, the historical perspective, Yeah.
So, I mean, back from the beginning, like you're in Maryland and you kind of moved around a bit and you kind of settled down in Florida. It's a different fishery, right, than any of those places that we were talking about, before really there's not too many places in the world you can catch a sailfish, catch a big fish off the reef, go inshore to get a tarpon or a snook or even a bonefish, and then you're catch bass like all in the same day.
Right.
Not too many places on the planet you can do that. That had to have been something that you noticed right off the bat you were attracted to about this area, I would imagine.
Oh, for sure. The diversity of opportunities is huge.
Yeah.
But, I mean, growing up in Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, as I was growing up, the Chesapeake Bay was collapsing. That was the 70s.
Wow.
Stripe pollution,
Okay.
overfishing, bad resource management, the usual list. They closed the striped bass fishery entirely for 5-6 years. We're trying to get it to come back, and they got lucky, and it did. They're having mismanagement issues again, but that's a different story.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the collapse of the striped bass. I saw the collapse of the blue crabs, oysters, as I was learning about all the science. And so that really, that kind of helped guide my career, not just to do the science, but to do it in a way that's meaningful.
Right.
And a lot of that goes back to having an early realization that if the habitats are healthy and the water quality is good, you can have a healthy fishery. So if your fish population declines because of overfishing, you can recover from that. You stop the fishing or put in stricter regulations. you lose habitat and you lose your water quality, fishery's done. Doesn't really matter how much you try and manage the harvest or the catch or anything like that. The fishery's done. I mean, a great local example, unfortunately, is Indian River Lagoon. Right, the loss of seagrass has been catastrophic, and so the redfish fishery is catch release only in the IRL, and that's not because of overfishing or harvest or anything like that. It's because of lack of habitat. So yeah, I've lived in a lot of places, and there's a commonality, a common theme, and that's all about habitat and water quality. And so that's been a real focus, but then that also reflects my kind of approach to fishing. Whether you're fishing for trout or bass or snook or tarpon, you have to learn the conditions that those fish require and prefer in order to figure out where they're going to most likely be. And so that's a big part of, I used to joke about, you have to think like a fish. It's a joke, they don't think. They just are.
Right.
So yeah, that's again an example of kind of melding the science and the fishing. But if you understand what makes those different fish tick, what makes them feed where they feed or move how and when and where they move, then yeah, you can catch sailfish and inshore fish and freshwater fish all on that same day if you wanted to. It's about understanding how everything kind of connects that way.
You've seen a little bit of a bounce back in the IRL.
Yeah.
I mean, recently I've heard of like a lot of improvement. I mean, we were recently up there with a couple of the Starbright events that we were talking about before the show started, and the word on the street is like, hey, some of the grass is coming back, and obviously with the clam initiatives might be helping in some of the areas, but there might be other reasons too that you might see that I'd love you to share with us, like that you might be seeing happening.
Yeah. So Mosquito Lagoon, the seagrass last year really came back strong, which is great. One of the concerns is we're not exactly sure why.
Okay.
That's part of what colleagues are trying to figure out. But unfortunately now there's another algae bloom going on, and hopefully it doesn't expand because that's what gets the seagrass when it shades all the sunlight. And so the fishing picked up in the Mosquito Lagoon with that seagrass come back. But in order to have a full recovery of the populations, that's going to take some time.
Yeah.
So just to kind of give you a ballpark idea, Chesapeake Bay, it took them about 40 some years of constant work on improving all that stuff, water, habitat, everything else, to get their seagrass to come back in forests. So we're seeing improvements in Mosquito, northern Indian River Lagoon, northern Banana. I was just out fishing on Sunday down the south of Sebastian Inlet towards Vero, and for the first time saw some seagrass pushing in there, which is great. Water clarity's been very good for most of the past year with some exceptions, and so that's helping the seagrass come back. Brevard County, where I live, is doing a lot of work on trying to fix the sources of too many nutrients, which is what's causing the algae blooms. So they're converting a lot of the septic systems to sewer. They just put in some grants to upgrade their sewage treatment plants, doing more work to clean up the stormwater. Stormwater is basically just when it rains, heavy rain, all that water you see running down the street.
Right.
We have to figure out a way to filter that because that's got a lot of toxins in it.
Yeah, that's runoff's a big problem here too with our intercoastal and Broward County being so seawall everywhere. Yeah. That runoff's a big deal around here.
Yeah, for sure. So in that situation, building water retention ponds to help filter out a lot of that stuff. So yeah, Brevard County, Martin County, and River County, they've all been doing different levels of that type of work.
Yeah.
And that seems to be having a positive influence. Well, there are positive changes, figuring out those specific causes and how long they'll last. Once that lasts for 5 or 6 years, then I'll be more optimistic.
Okay.
But an unhealthy system tends to be boom or bust. Everything's great and then everything crashes. And so, we need to see some consistency over time.
Yeah, I'm generally of the mindset that the earth is a resilient place, and that, if we do leave parts of it alone for some time, it will heal itself like fairly quickly. So when you bring up things like that with the whole 5 or 6 years thing, I remain optimistic. Like we had Lisa Fitzgerald on recently.
Oh, yeah.
And we were kind of talking a little bit about that. I think that topic got raised as well. And, there's hope, right? That this is why we do this. It's not, conservation as a whole isn't just, just something where we want to wave flags and yell into the void or anything. There is hope that all this is just, a circumstance that will heal.
It can heal for sure. So the way I look at it is the scientists, okay, if let's say you got cancer 40 years ago, you were pretty much screwed, right? We didn't have treatments, so didn't have much understanding, diagnosis, okay, you're going to die. Now, because we've done a ton of research on cancer, there's a lot of treatments. And so that research is translated into application so that you can get treatments, chemo, radiation, whatever it is, and you have a pretty good chance of living a normal length life, quality life. I look at us in the same kind of scenario where when BTT started in the late 90s, we didn't know squat about bonefish tarpon temperament. And we knew some about other species, but not as much as we should have. So in that time since, over 25 years, we're essentially the cancer researchers. And we've figured out what has caused the illnesses in our coastal fisheries. And we have figured out what the best solutions are. So now the challenge is translating that information to, following that would be the doctors treating the patient, and that's the policymakers and the resource managers. So we've got all that information. We just need the doctors to apply it to the patient to get the patient healthy. So that gives me a lot of optimism. The thing is that as anglers, we have to think of ourselves as patient advocates, right? So let's say you have someone in your family get sick, goes in the hospital. You can't just kind of sit there and see what happens. You have to advocate for them. You have to make sure they get the right treatment. If they're not doing well, you have to advocate for a change, those types of things. And so as anglers, that's what we are. We're the patient advocates. And the patients are not just the fisheries, but the habitats in the water. So yeah, we have a responsibility there too.
You have a staff of scientists there at BTT, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure, obviously, you guys are doing the thick research and just turning over every stone and getting all of it done. But how much of that is based upon what we talk about here on this show, citizen science, like, other anglers and even the great ones on the panel that we saw in the symposium, like the legends up there? How much of that is including anglers?
Pretty much all of it.
All of it.
Part of our core operation system is, and citizen science, I don't really like the term because they're more like collaborators and partners. Citizen science kind of implies that, well, they might kind of sort of know something or help out.
Right.
People who spend a lot of time on the water, whether it's guides or anglers, they've seen a lot. And they might not have all the explanations for why, but a lot of times they do. And that's important information. And so they're more partners. And so we approach every single one of our projects in that type of collaborative fashion. So we might assess that there's a problem, but we won't jump into a location and say, oh, you should do this. We have conversations first with people who actually use the resource and kind of get their perspective on what they think the problems are. Or talk about what we've figured out with some of the research and how it might help what they're trying to get solved, different problems. So it's very much a partnership and a two-way communication type of thing.
Yeah, we bring up the term citizen science here because, a lot of the guests that come on this show do. One of the problems down here, up through Jupiter area and Pompano and Miami is the sharks. And the sharks, eating the catch and the bycatch and all that. And a lot of the anglers disagree with how that's being handled. and they feel like, oh, they're not listening to this. It is the science, the captains, and the anglers that are out there all the time. Say if they're catching sailfish or kingfish in 300 foot of water, and they feel like, oh, the scientists that are doing the research from certain organizations might not be fishing in the proper areas, so they're not seeing the sharks that we're seeing because the sharks are being predatory and they know where to be, and it's a learned behavior and that kind of thing. So they feel like that's where the whole term, the citizen science, came in. That they're not listening to the anglers that are out there on the water and having basically every other sailfish get eaten in half.
Yeah, but even in that situation, if there's a conversation, two-way conversation about exactly what you're talking about, then that would inform the science. So they might change where they're sampling, for example, or where they're observing based on that.
That's been the frustration. There's been no conversation. They don't organizations don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And
that's one of the things that sets BTT apart.
That's kind of what I'm getting to.
Yeah. Is that we've, from our outset, that's always been the, part of how we work.
Yeah.
Is we never, ever go into a place saying, we know best, this is what you should do. It's always about having the conversations first, and then moving forward from there.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I was doing a little bit of research about you on the internet before you're going to come in, just to make sure I got all my bases covered and that kind of thing. I do that for every guest that comes on, right? And then it's, you wrote a couple of books or a few books or whatever, right? And so I'm like, let me see what these books are. I'm expecting to come up with the science books, right? But they're fishing books, right? And which I thought, that warmed my heart a little bit. I'm like, oh, cool. This guy's just writing books about fishing. This is great, which speaks to, I think, you and your passion and your mission with like you said, it just kind of was a natural progression with the science. There was never really a moment. It was always there, right? I know how I feel about this, but how important is conservation to you?
No, it's everything.
In the work you do, what's the meaning behind it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything, because if you don't have the healthy habitats and healthy water, clean water, it doesn't really matter what else you do.
Right.
You could manage catch rates forever, and it's not going to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, conservation is pretty much everything about the future. And nobody else is going to really do it. We have to do it. Not honestly, it's BTT, of course, but also all the anglers who are interested in having a future in fishing.
Mm-hmm.
We have to focus on making sure that we protect habitats and water quality that's good, and then restore what's broken. So yeah, that's at the core of everything. Is having that long-term perspective.
Yeah.
So it's not just about today, fishing today or Sunday or next week. It's about 10 years ago, 20 years in the future, that type of thing, for sure. That's huge. And so, I mean, education is a big part of that. Nobody can know everything, so sharing information is helpful to all the parties involved. And that's a big motivation for the books, is to translate the science into fisherman terms, so that there's that better understanding of what makes a fish tick, but there's also a better link between all that and then the management side of it, right? So if you're an informed angler and you know, for example, that juvenile snook and tarpon require mangrove wetlands, and you see some development that's approved that's going to clear out 20 acres of mangrove wetland, that should piss you off.
Mm-hmm.
And you should make noise about it. If it's illegal, you call it in. It wasn't until relatively recently that anglers will get involved in that kind of stuff. But I think there's a lot of realization. And I think BTT's been a big part of that, is getting the education is huge. And so that was my personal motivation for the books. But then also a lot of what we focus on at BTT is, again, that exchange of information.
Yeah, that was one of the things I've always noticed about BTT is that there are a lot of organizations that may just wave their fists at people. There are a lot of organizations that are simply there to just raise awareness. Nothing wrong with that, right? But BTT, to me, always took it a step further, did their own research. I mean, case in point, you sitting across from me right now, leading that team. And you've always found things, interesting things, that possibly weren't thought about before. For example, like the pharmaceuticals in the water. I remember at the last symposium that we had at PGA up there in Palm Beach, that was a big topic during that symposium, was the pharmaceuticals. And I think that kind of caught a lot of people off guard. Like, wait, what, how do you know that? Like the pharmaceuticals, and wow, did you guys really went that deep to find that out? And when did that first kind of come to light?
One of our colleagues that we work with at Florida International, Dr. Jen Rahage, we had done some work with her and one of her students on reviewing what research had been done on contaminants in fish in South Florida and the Florida Keys. Mm-hmm. And there's decent amount, copper is a big one, and some others. And she was presenting those results at a conference, and talked to a colleague there who worked on pharmaceutical exposure in fish in Europe. And it was just kind of emerging at that point as far as an issue of concern. And so, we jumped in on that 100% because of the way that pharmaceuticals are transmitted into the environment. Mm-hmm. We were pretty confident that we'd find large amounts of pharmaceuticals in our fish.
So, I mean, explain it to me like work? I'm a 6-year-old. No. I mean, like how do many pharmaceuticals get in the water? Is it like a sanitary issue, or is it?
So when you take a drug, let's say a blood pressure medication, your body really only processes maybe 50% of that.
Okay.
And then the rest goes into the waste stream. Our wastewater infrastructure, sewage treatment plants, are designed to take out nutrients, solids, of course, but then nutrients. And a lot of them don't do a very good job of taking out the nutrients, which is why we have pollution problems and algae blooms. But in addition, they're not designed to take out pharmaceuticals or other contaminants. So anything that goes in, as far as contaminants goes, also comes out.
So the pharmaceuticals are primarily being eliminated from us.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's some, people flushing their pharmas if they're not going to use them.
Right.
But mostly it's through us. In addition, if you have a septic system, that doesn't remove any pharmaceuticals either.
Right.
And so they're basically, they're pretty common throughout the system. So in the Florida Keys, there was one bonefish. Let's see, the average number of pharmaceuticals in bonefish, I think, was around 7. Yeah. So each bonefish had an average of 7 pharmaceuticals. One bonefish had 16.
What?
Yeah. And a large portion of the pharmaceuticals are present in the fish at what you would call therapeutic levels for the fish, which means that they're having effects. And the same colleagues in Europe doing the work, they see behavioral effects. So, for example, we find a lot of anti-anxiety meds, opioids, but also Narcan.
I'm getting some funny visuals right now.
Yeah. But what happens is with all these medications is it changes fish behavior, among other things. So fish, for example, trout and salmon that they've done research on will become more risk-taking, less concerned about predators. Mm-hmm. And so salmon fingerlings might migrate down the streams sooner than they should, which means that there's not thousands of other fingerlings to kind of dilute the predator effect.
Right.
Other fish will get antisocial, which might help if you're a barracuda trying to get your own food, but then when it comes to spawning, not so much. And we then followed that up with a study on redfish, because one of the concerns is, just the Florida Keys, bonefish, who cares? And so we did redfish in 9 estuaries from Jacksonville all around the state up to Pensacola. And we found pharmaceuticals in something like 98% of redfish. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty much everywhere. And with redfish, the preliminary data suggests that fish with higher levels of pharmaceuticals have a lower body weight than you would expect for their length. Right? So if a fish of a certain length is typically, let's say a fish of 20, 21 inches is probably 4 or 5 pounds. Mm-hmm. That fish might be 3 to 4 pounds, right? So we're seeing those kinds of effects. So we hope to get into some of that effects research soon, but most importantly, that gives us ammunition to try and get our sewage treatment systems in the state fixed.
Is the majority of this like a septic issue?
Depends on where you are.
Okay.
In places like where I am in Brevard County on the Barrier Island, most of us are on septic.
Right.
But even some of the places that are on sewage treatment systems, the systems are so old that the pipes leak. So we haven't invested. I mean, a lot of our sewage treatment systems in Florida are 50s, 60s.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't upgraded them.
Overdue.
Since. Oh, yeah. well overdue.
Yep.
So,
but we had a lot of that, big issues with that here in downtown Fort Lauderdale in recent years, and even now, with all the sewage systems exploding and going under. And, they did a big invest on replacing them. It was almost kind of like too little, too late. And I know Pompano kind of got a little bit ahead of that. Maybe seeing what they were going through, like, oh, we better get ahead of ours too. They did a good job of replacing a lot of their sewer. But still having, some issues, but not like Fort Lauderdale was having.
Yeah, I mean, infrastructure requires investment. You don't just do it once and step aside. Also, in a lot of places, they made a lot of shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's coming back to roost right now.
Right. Back, like you said, the 50s and the 60s in Florida, it was very much a different time, different place than it is now.
But even more recently, there were some counties that are still allowing developments to occur on septic, which is, we are
happen. Yeah,
no, it shouldn't be happening, especially if you're close to a water body.
I mean, this is really a water quality issue.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right. When it comes to all this, I mean, like, I know a lot of people were expecting when you guys were doing their studies, like, oh, they're going to find so much Roundup, and
we weren't looking for Roundup.
Didn't seem like. I mean, even other water quality tests too were like, oh, but it seemed like once you guys stumbled upon the pharmaceutical thing, that really opened a lot of eyes.
Yeah, and that provided us leverage in Tallahassee. We were able to get some money. I want to say $100 and some million for Indian River Lagoon to start addressing that, and that's where Brevard County has applied for money to upgrade their sewage treatment systems.
Great.
The other interesting thing that Brevard County did, and
so this is the action part.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
It's Brevard County citizens in 2016 who had a referendum, and we voted to institute a half-cent sales tax that goes to addressing the IRL problems.
Mm-hmm.
So stormwater treatment, sewage treatment, all that type of stuff. And that's raised a lot of money, hundreds of millions, and it's still being applied. So that's coming up for referendum renewal next year.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that passes, because it's giving Brevard County a lot of money they otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But yeah, you talk about the action. So everything that BTT does, all the research, I mean, I find it interesting, but that's not why we do it. Everything we do has a management application. So we might see a certain threat, like water quality. We might have a lack of knowledge, like until relatively recently, we didn't know where bonefish spawned.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do that research, knowing that whatever we find out at the end will have applications to a management concern.
Right, and you guys with the bone, like there's a closure you guys are involved with now, isn't there?
Well, we used information on permit movements and other research in the Florida Keys to get a spawning season closure on Western dry rocks.
Okay.
So essentially, 75% or so of the permit that were tagged on the flats in the lower Keys went to Western dry rocks to spawn. And so we were able to, as part of a long process, get permit catch and release only during spawning season, which is April through July. And so people were catch and release fishing for permit at Western dry rocks, but anywhere between 30 and 60% of those fish would get eaten by sharks before they were landed.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that turned into, well, that's not sustainable. You're going to all the spawning fish and they're getting wiped out. So now Western dry rocks is a seasonal closure period.
Okay.
So that, there's no fishing, even catch from release. And we're starting to see that the permit spending more time there than they used to when they were getting fished. And yeah, we're still doing research for the next few years to see if their numbers continue to increase at the spawning site. More recently, we've figured out a northern Upper Keys bonefish spawning or pre-spawning location and Biscayne National Park. And so now we're working with the state to make that also a seasonal fishing closure. The research we've done in the Bahamas on bonefish spawning shows that if you fish for the fish in the spawning aggregation, they'll survive, but they're going to get eaten by sharks.
Right.
I mean, there's just too many sharks when there's thousands of bonefish.
Especially in the Bahamas. I mean, in certain parts of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But even not on the flats. So when bonefish, we think of them as a flat species.
Right.
Right. And that's mostly where they spend their time. And the adults have mostly a pretty small home range. But when they go to spawn, which is spawning might be on from late October till March or April, they'll migrate. We've tracked them migrating 70 miles, 80 miles, and they go to places that aren't the flats. They're kind of deeper water.
So you're tracking migrations?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they get into what we call pre-spawning aggregations.
How are we tracking them?
It's a secret. I'll circle back on that.
Gotcha.
And then when they spawn, they go offshore at night, and we've tracked them going down to 430 feet deep.
Wow.
Yeah. So you think of a shallow water fish.
Wow.
Migrating all that distance, getting together with 2, 5, 10,000 other bonefish. And that night going out offshore, deep water, and going down that deeply spawn.
That's a pretty good sinking line to get those.
Well, when we've tracked them in the Bahamas, you can see the sharks at night. Reef sharks, when they're in shorts, lemons, black tips, and when they move out to the reef, it's more reef sharks. Tracking them at night, our boat got bumped a couple times by tiger sharks. We talked to some of the offshore guys, probably some of them listen to your podcast, and every once in a while a swordfish or a marlin have bonefish in its stomach. And if it's the spawning time of year, I would guess it's probably that type of thing. So yeah, figuring out all those different things and getting those protected. In the Bahamas, we've gotten a number of national parks declared, not for fishing issues, but so there's no development at these spawning locations. As to how we track them, a couple methods. One is dart tags, spaghetti tags, people call them. They're the things you stick in the side of the fish and you have a number on them. So we know where they were tagged, and then people catch them and let us know. We'll also use what are called acoustic tags. We surgically implant those tags. They're the size of a AA battery, and they send out a supersonic ping. Think about a submarine movie, that kind of thing. And then we have what are called receivers or detection devices that will put in strategic locations to pick up those fish, and each tag has a unique ping code.
So that's how you're getting the depth.
Yeah, that's how we get the movements, the spawning migration. And then, when we track them, we'll live track them at night using a receiver device on the boat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And those tracks, they can last 16, 18 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
So I love how, first of all, I'm just curious. When you propose things like a closure, right? I mean, you guys basically approaching them and lobbying them to do this, or do you guys have some sort of authority to it?
No, we have no authority. We provide the information to the resource managers, and often we'll propose actions we think are relevant.
Okay.
In the Florida Keys for Western Dry Rocks, it was a collaboration with the fishing community, a lot of the fishing community, the flats community. CCA was on board and others, IGFA, for the Western Dry Rocks closure.
Gotcha.
And so that went through the whole FWC commission process.
Gotcha.
And the thing for Biscayne Bay with the bonefish, same type of thing. In the Bahamas, it's more direct interaction with the government or Bahamas National Trust, which is kind of their version of the National Park Service. In Belize, we work directly with various managers and agencies. So yeah, and the fishing community, of course. So it's a combination.
We had last year before the whole like Yes on 2 campaign, we had Robert Spotswood on from the South Atlantic Fisheries Council. I think I said that right. I always kind of jumble my words when I try to say the title of that organization properly. Yeah, he was they're kind of in a similar boat. I think they can do all the research and everything they want, but ultimately their final say is a suggestion to what FWC and NOAA and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very multi-leveled process, which is why the communication is important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the standard, historical standard was all top-down management. So the state or the feds would go out, do their research, or others do the research. They get the data and make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
That's becoming, to varying degrees, depending on the fishery and location, that's becoming more of a collaborative process with the communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so going back to like spawning fish, spawning fish and spawning locations are kind of the last place you want to be putting a lot of harvest in, because that's the future.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like going to a maternity ward and wiping it out and wondering why there are no kids in kindergarten in 5 years. So yeah, that's one to be extra cautious on.
Yeah,
with those types of situations.
What's the largest migration that you guys have been witnessing? Like in distance?
Good question, because we're still figuring out for the Keys. I think the longest one we saw was in the Bahamas on Abaco. It was like 120 miles. Yeah, for bonefish.
Okay.
Tarpon, not for spawning per se, but just migrations.
Tarpon are long, right?
Yeah.
They go on forever, don't they?
We tracked them. We tagged early on in the tracking study for tarpon. We tagged a fish with Willie Benson in Key West. And a couple months later, it was up in Chesapeake Bay.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's pretty common.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard that they were kind of going out into the Atlantic too, weren't they?
Somewhat.
North of Marsh Harbor area?
Well, there's always tarpon there.
Yeah.
Always have been.
Way out, though.
Could be. We know they spawn offshore. So
okay.
Bonefish. They'll go out offshore and spawn at night. We've tracked them. Well, satellite tags recorded them going out about 350 feet.
Mm-hmm.
At night. It's probably spawning. Yeah, so they'll go out in the ocean, but most of the migrations are along the coast. Of all the tagging we've done, it's been very, very rare for them to cross open ocean.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. You mentioned with the Western dry rock stuff, with the work with the CCA and the IGFA, and I love that about BTT, and I love that about CCA and IGFA too, quite frankly, is those are organizations that, we do a lot of work with and we hold near and dear to our hearts. And part of the reason is, like we say, with the whole connected by water aspect of our ethos and our theory here of reaching across the aisle and working together, because I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. When you navigate like the conservation world, and, we do a lot of, if you want to call it investigation on this show, we just bring in a lot of different people from in that world. And we just kind of try to do a deep dive into what they do. And, we've learned that there are certain organizations that don't want anything to do with any other organizations, and they're kind of just in it for themselves, and maybe they just want that funding to keep coming their way, or whatever reason that they have it. And I don't ever like saying any names of organizations that I say no off the top of my head, but I love that about BTT. I love that about IGFA and CCA, and there are others that do as well, that reach across the aisle and work together for the common good. And I think that's so vitally important. I think that's what conservation should be at the end of the day. Don't we all want a healthy Florida and Bahamas and Caribbean, everything's just to flow the way it's supposed to flow? And, and I understand that there's money involved and there's careers involved and all the other stuff like that. I get that. That's what, what makes the world go around kind of thing. But, at the end of the day, like you stated earlier, if none of it's here, then none of it matters.
Yeah, our outlook is it's all about the fish.
Right.
It's not about us. It's about the fish. So, whether it's doing the research and trying conservation, like we've already talked about, habitat protection or restoration, or if it's about, proper fish handling techniques so that the fish actually survive after you release it. it should all be about the fish first, and then us somewhere down the line. So yeah, we'll work with anybody. Doesn't really matter as long as we have a common goal.
Yeah.
And you're never going to have a complete agreement with all organizations. But if you have an agreement on a particular topic, then you work with them. I mean, it's, if you're just in a personal relationship, you're not going to agree on everything.
Right.
But you don't let the one thing you disagree on break everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about that type of approach, which we take pretty much everywhere, is to just get it done and find as many collaborators as you can to help get the final result that you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, that's outstanding. I love that perspective. I really do. And, you guys are heavily involved in like habitat management, as well, which is vitally important, right? I know you guys have done some juvenile tarpon habitat, a lot of mangrove planting, which if anyone's listening to this show or follows us understands that the mangrove planting is a big deal for us as well. So, take me into a little bit about that, like about it, kind of like I would see that as that kind of makes BTT like a full circle organization. It's not just, focusing on one thing. It's focusing on water quality and habitat and the fish, right?
Everything that affects the fish and makes the fish successful is what we work on.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a pretty big list. As far as habitats go with juvenile tarpon, that's the most vulnerable habitat, right? If it's a stinky, mucky, mosquito-infested backwater swamp, that's juvenile tarpon habitat.
Yeah.
That's where they start out, once the larvae come in. And Florida's already lost 50% of its mangroves, and that's all juvenile tarpon habitat. Snook, pretty similar. So we do a lot of work to identify juvenile tarpon habitats. We work with anglers and guides who help report where they've seen tarpon less than 12 inches long within the past year, and then we'll go check out those sites. We'll characterize the sites as far as altered or natural, if there's any development issues, those types of things, and then we'll use that to prioritize our conversations with the state on protection or restoration. So if anybody's listening and they know some good juvenile tarpon habitats, go to our website and under projects, you'll see that you can work with Joel and Wilson, who leads that program for us. Because the more sites we get, the more ammunition we have for restoration and protection. So that's a huge one. We're working on 2 restoration projects now in Rookery Bay. Working with Rookery Bay National Estuary Research Program and also the DEP, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, to restore a lot of acres that's been cut off by roads, so there's no water flow. I'm working to restore that water flow, which will increase the amount of habitat by tens of thousands of acres. We're looking in Florida right now. We're evaluating 6 sites in Charlotte Harbor to figure out to prioritize those and then obtain funding to do restoration there.
Has Hurricane Ian affected a lot of that area from that regard?
Not from that regard. There's a lot of damage, but
more from the human regard then.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely some environmental damage as well, but realize that the ecosystems we live in Florida or the Caribbean, they've been going through hurricanes for eons.
Forever, yeah.
So tends to be a certain resilience. That can change when you get something like Hurricane Dorian, that sat on top of Grand Bahama Navico.
Wasn't moving.
5 days.
It just sat there.
7-8 years prior to that, Hurricane Joaquin did the same thing over Crooked and Ackland Islands. That's different. That kind of stuff is new. To have a Cat 5 hurricane sit on one place for 5 days. And so we're doing a lot of mangrove restoration in Grand Bahama Navico to help the system kind of give it a kickstart.
Yeah.
In a normal hurricane, you'll get patchy damage. So this street, just as an example, might have all the trees down, all the power lines down. 2 streets over, no problem at all. And if you're in a natural system, the seeds from the plants 2 streets over would kind of repopulate the tree population here. Same with mangroves. If it's kind of patchy, you'll have one healthy patch, create a lot of seeds, and they'll kind of get transported to those empty spots. But the extent of damage in Grand Bahama and Abaco is so much that there's no way the system would be able to do that in a timely fashion. And so we've planted close to 120,000 mangroves now.
Fantastic.
To kind of give a jump start. And we'll keep planting, not at quite the pace, but we'll keep planting.
Mm-hmm. I think mangrove planting is so vitally important. Like, really, it is. We work closely with Project Sea Safe and the Red Wines and with Starbright's initiative and doing a lot of that work. And the work that Corey Redwine does on that regard is like incredible. But hearing about 120,000 huge.
Yeah.
But I think that restoring those mangrove coastlines is just so important.
Well, yeah, it's essential.
Yeah.
Because it prevents erosion. In places that have fringing mangrove forests,
mm-hmm.
the damage from hurricane surge is much, much less. Or you'll remember that terrible tsunami in Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
What was that, 15, 20 years or more?
Wow, has it been that long already?
Yeah.
Wow. Seems like yesterday.
The areas that had not cleared their mangroves or damaged their coral reefs did much, much, much better as far as damage than places that basically exposed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps us for sure, but it also helps keep intact all the habitats around it, which is great for the fish.
Yeah.
So yeah, having those habitats is huge.
Yeah. We talk a lot about, I always say with conservation, there's no finish line. I think someone once said to me, "Oh, it's a marathon and it's not a sprint." I'm like, "It's not a race. It's never going to be over. Like, there's never going to be a day. We're like, hey, we won. We did it." It's like an ongoing thing. I guess science in general is just like that as well, right? At its core, right? And, but if I had to ask you, like, from where we were, say, 10, 15 years ago
mm-hmm.
to where we're at now and to where we're going, where do you think we are in this race to get it to a place where we're, I don't want to say satisfied, but at least feeling good about it?
Good question. I mean, we've made a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm.
All the issues we've talked about today, we have data on. We didn't have that data 20 years ago. So we could advocate some, but we couldn't really have conversations with any leverage. That's changed. So we're actually able to influence policy now, which is a massive change. So that's a huge improvement. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It never ends. And the conservation is just as much of a lifestyle way of living as fishing and surfing, all that kind of stuff.
It's funny. I actually was talking to Liza about that too, and I recently went on a diet. Right? So this is what made me say this comment. But what's been successful for me is I'm not looking at it as a diet. I'm looking at it as a lifestyle change. Like, I'm just going to have to live my life like this for the rest of my life.
Yes.
And I think that's ultimately a good one-to-one comparison on that.
Yeah, and so it involves not just us living that lifestyle, but it's about convincing others that they also need to change their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, some people, like my neighbor, is really big on a super green lawn.
Right.
And so he's putting a lot of herbicides and pesticides on it. And even if he does, or his yard people do it, in quotes, correctly, that's still getting into the Indian River Lagoon. If it was just him, no problem. But it's tens of thousands, if not more, people doing that. That's a lifestyle change.
Mm-hmm. What about
those types of things?
Like, I mean, coastal spraying, right? I've heard mixed reviews about whether or not there's a lot of truth to how much damage it's actually doing to the environment.
I mean, as far as
with the contributing to blooms and doing all these different things like that. And as far as,
what do you mean by coastal spray?
The spraying that they do along to get rid of the vegetation on the coastlines.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Glad that's like with Roundup or glyphosate.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that septic is more the issue than that might be.
All the above.
Okay.
So it's kind of like you're talking about a diet, right? Yeah, you want to eat different foods, but you also want to exercise more. Mm-hmm. And the whole suite of things that'll, help you get to where you want to be. And it's the same with this. It's not one thing. It's a combination of factors. and the relative importance of the factors differs depending on where you are. So, for example, in Indian River Lagoon, northern IRL, most of the inputs are from the residential, sewer, septic, stormwater runoff, yard chemicals. Down in the southern IRL, it's a lot of agriculture because it flows from Lake Okeechobee. So there's a lot of, it depends.
Right.
But as far as the glyphosate goes, colleagues at Orca, my data are old, but at one point they'd sampled 140 some fish, and all but one or two had glyphosate in their tissue, which means it's in the system. It's not just sprayed wherever and not in the system. That's a problem. And then doing a review of research on glyphosate, global research, glyphosate in the system causes a lot of problems. And a lot of them are very similar to the pharmaceutical problems. So we're advocating, and actually Brevard County is doing, for lakes up in Brevard County, residential lakes. They're giving grants to communities to purchase basically floating lawnmowers to cut the grass that way. And then they take that grass, they get it out of the system. They might use it as fertilizer on farm fields. To get rid of the nutrients and then not have all those chemicals put into the system.
A floating lawnmower?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look it up online,
okay,
there's a bunch of different designs.
Right.
It goes along.
I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, with blades, and it kind of cuts up the grass.
Yeah, you've seen this?
They can harvest it.
Yeah. Me and my kid saw them at the last Touch a Trail event. They had one.
Oh, really? Okay.
What is this thing? This is my first time.
Really? I'm gonna have to look that up. Floating lawnmower.
So short term, the argument is it costs a lot of money, whereas the chemicals don't.
Right.
The problem is that all these chemical effects, they're kind of like, you've heard of the term paying it forward. This is expensing it forward. So we're creating a legacy problem for those that come after us. We're seeing some of those effects now. We already talked about some of the issues. But I don't want to be responsible for putting that on future generations.
Right.
And I don't even have any kids. So it's not a personal type of thing. It's just a sense of responsibility. We think that there's issues there as well that could be addressed better than they are right now.
Yeah. I mean, from a 30,000-foot view, I guess we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier about the 50-year-old sewer systems and everything like that. Florida is a new place now than it was before. I'll say it on the show 1,000 times. I think the biggest issue we face is sprawl, because I think it all just stems from that. That's kind of like a trickle down aspect of it. Like, well, we have this problem now, we have this problem now, we have this problem now because of sprawl. People start creeping more towards the center of the state, with their concrete foundations, and it's becoming an issue. Runoff being one of the effects of that, right?
Yeah, water runs downhill, so the watersheds, even if development is inland, it's going to get to the ocean somewhere.
Yeah,
and so we're also pushing the state to try and work on watershed level management. So they're not just looking at, say, this mangrove patch or this seagrass patch, but what are the activities that are upstream in the watershed that are affecting these habitats in the estuary. So that you can kind of get an idea of exactly what those effects have been and would be if that kind of development continues, for sure.
Do you guys have I want to ask this. I don't want to say what's the main thing you're focusing on, because it all seems kind of relative, to each other, right? It's all kind of, constructed that way. Is the way that your organization is set up, right? And the research that you guys do. But are there any new avenues of exploration that you're kind of focusing on now more than anything else?
That's a continuation of what we've been doing. Focusing on major things, the habitat, water, etc. No, it's all the things we've talked about, just more places or more in depth, or like any organization, our biggest capacity limitation is funding.
Right.
We would do more quickly if we had more money, but that's true for life.
Right.
Right. So we just keep plugging away with the overall goal of being effective at changing the management so that we actually will have the fishery. So
right.
Yeah, there really is no finish line because you're always just trying to improve, and it's not like some systems are in great shape, some are not so great. The system's not so great. It's not like they just collapsed one day for no reason. It took us decades to get them there, so it takes some time to try and get them back.
That's a good point.
It takes patience. It's an investment. It takes persistence. All those things. If you're a scientist, all that becomes automatic.
Right.
Because, even when you finish one thing, it's on to figuring out the next. Yeah.
Thanks for going through all that like that with me. But I have to ask you, is there a preferred fish that you have? A tarpon, a permit, a bonefish? I mean, where's your heart here?
That's like asking a parent who their favorite kid is.
I could tell you who mine is. I'm not going to put that on camera.
Tarpon, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's way too.
I mean, they've been around 100 million years.
Yeah.
Right? So you're fishing for dinosaurs. It's pretty crazy. The acrobatics, all the different places that they show up, from way up a river to offshore. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I my favorite part about tarpon is I don't know which one's my favorite to catch, the little poons or the big ones. Because it's a different situation altogether, but it's the same fish at the end of the day, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah.
Right? Because I can't say that about like a mahi. Like at the end of the day, you want to catch the biggest mahi you possibly can catch.
Right.
Right? Like if a little peanut dolphin comes along, you could care less half the time, right? But if you're down in Chokoloskee and you got a fly rod in your hand or even like a light tackle rod and you catch a little poon, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's something to be said for catching a bonefish on the flats in Marsh Harbor and the Bahamas or something like that. That there's amazing too.
It's all about sight fishing.
Yeah.
So.
And the reward of catching a permit on a fly. I mean, incredible.
Yeah. No, permit fishing. Bonefish are the gateway drug and permit are the heroin.
That's a good way to put it.
So I'd like bone to sight fishing. I'm good.
Yeah.
If I freshwater fish for bass, I'll fish poppers or sight fish them in the shallows.
Yeah.
And so that's what snook. Sunday I was out sight fishing for snook and redfish.
Right.
Yeah, it's all about the visual. For me. But tarpon would be top of the list.
And I think it's important to point out, like the perspective of VTT, is it's an angler-run organization, right? And those they want to. You're doing what you do because you want to catch more fish. Right. So, which is really, really important, I think, perspective to have when people are listening to any of this, right? Whether you agree with anything that was said or disagree with anything that was said or have a different point of view, just know that BTT is an angler-run organization and they're doing this because they want to catch more fish.
Yeah. It's also important for a couple other reasons. One is when we work with anglers and guides, a lot of times they'll share with us information on where they fish, which, if you're a fishing guide, that's your business plan.
Right.
But they do that because they know that BTT keeps that information confidential. There's a bunch of places that I don't fish, some of which I've fished before because they were part of those kind of conversations. So I'm not going to go poach a spot that I may have learned from that kind of work.
Yeah.
And there's also some information we get on the scientific side that we use to try and get better management that we don't really publicize. Like some of the tarpon migration stuff. Because our job isn't to help anglers find the fish. Our job is to make sure the fishery is still around at 100 years or more.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, there's places I know that fish are that I don't fish. And I'm not going to tell anybody else where they are either.
Right. That's good. That's good though. It's a good quality. It's good quality. So I have to ask you a question that I ask all the anglers that come on my show, right? And everybody has one. What's your one that got away?
Oh, boy. You know, it's funny. You remember the ones that you lost more than you remember the
You
ones.
sure do. It's like when you get a report card, you get straight A's
Yeah.
and a B. Everyone's first question is, oh, what'd you get the B in?
Yeah.
What about the 4 A's or the 5 A's I got? You don't want to care. You don't care about those? That's where all the hard work went.
No doubt. Probably the first permit that I'd hooked on fly.
Okay.
I was living on St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, and we would fish. We could walk out from the beach on the south coast of the island and fish these back reef flats. So you'd have the ocean and the reef break up the waves, and behind it, there's a flat that mixed seagrass and coral roll. And the permit, you could see them come in the waves over the reef, and then they come back and feed. And so started spin fishing for them, and we're actually using urchins as bait. Get these purple urchins. They build it bigger than a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
We flip over a rock, get one of those, put them on we'll kind of wiggle a hook through the shell, and then use those as sight fish for permit. And so then we started switching over to fly fishing, and we tied some urchin patterns. So anyway, I was out there by myself and hooked this nice permit. And as always, he took off through the reef. And I was able to kind of navigate my way. The waves weren't bad through the reef, about waist deep. Fell a couple times. I used to have a scar in the shape of a brain coral on my knee.
Oh, really?
So anyway, after, I don't know, 30 minutes of that, I finally got him back over the reef. And he was kind of circling around me, as they do. I'm standing in thigh-deep water. And as I reached down to grab his tail, the leader just went, "Puh." And he just slowly swam.
Oh, couldn't even hold him.
I couldn't land the first one on fly, no.
Oh, man.
So that...
Yeah, you definitely want that one back, right?
That will stick with me, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's pretty cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Thank you for driving in from Melbourne and taking the time to. It's definitely appreciated. I mean, you shared a lot of great knowledge today. We definitely appreciate all the hard work that you do at BTT, and please keep it up. We look forward to hopefully doing more with BTT in the future. I know we're going to be getting involved with your symposium, which is coming up in November
7th and 8th
mm-hmm.
At Fort Lauderdale. If you want to get a huge download on the kind of stuff we talked about, definitely attend.
Yeah, I mean the symposium. It's like once every 3 years,
every 3
right?
years, yeah.
So the last one, I was set up as an artist for that one, and it was just we were there all weekend. It's such a great event. I mean, they had the Legends panel. Then that's the thing, like Bonefish Tarpon Trust. I mean, you talk about clout. I mean, you have all the great ones are there, like behind this organization.
Right.
I mean, to see if I can remember, like Steve Huff and Andy Mill and Chico Fernandez and Bouncer Smith and Sandy Moret, and I'm going down the line here, and I'm going to forget.
Oh yeah, Stewie was there.
Yep, Stu Apt. I mean, all the great ones. They're all 100% behind this organization. And anytime you get those guys together and say this is the way to go, that's the way to go. So yeah. So and I mean, I very much appreciate you coming. Please get involved, donate,
become a member, donate if you can afford to. Educate yourself, and most importantly, advocate for improved management of all this stuff.
Yep.
That's the biggest thing by far.
100%. Dr. Aaron Adams.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. We're going to end this like we always do. Your ego is not your amigo. Always do your best at the end of the day, just like God do the rest. And do not ever forget that no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we're all connected by water. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.